Yeah.
All right, let's kick this off, guys. Everybody have fun last night?
Yes.
Hell yeah. For a Tuesday in Vegas. So this marks the beginning of the Lifestyle Entrepreneurs Academy portion of Project Rockstar. I know a lot of you said that you were excited to learn about this, and quite frankly, I'm excited to share as much as I can convey to you from my 10 or so years of entrepreneurial experience. And we want to start off today and just share a little bit about my background and some of the experience and businesses I've started, and then give you guys an exercise to start generating ideas, keeping in mind that the whole premise and the promise of Lifestyle Entrepreneurs Academy is taking the things that you're interested in and passionate about and turning them into products and services that can add value to others. So you're providing value into the market and also supporting your lifestyle with an online business that's structured in such a way that it can be run from anywhere in the world with your laptop and internet connection. So in effect, having this type of lifestyle, what you see Andy, Andrew, Alex, myself, many of you in fact already doing in some capacity, and being able to build it out and structure any number of businesses in this way. So, my background is perhaps different from some of the other guys in the sense that I never even really started down this traditional career path. From a very young age, around 13 or 14, I knew that all I really wanted to do was music. I got an electric guitar at 13, and really I think it was just over from then. I'd drop out of school, go home, learn Jimi Hendrix songs, play in bands, just sort of screw around, and was never that serious. I was never interested in business originally, per se. And so, I'll give you the condensed version of 10 or so years here, because I want to jump into the actual training part sort of as soon as possible. But after high school, I went down to Los Angeles, and I went to Los Angeles Music Academy. So I did a 12-month, no academic program, all focused on electric guitar. And playing out in bands, literally music 10, 11, 12 plus hours a day sometimes. And this was a scene where, if anybody's been in the music industry in LA, you actually have to pay clubs to go and play there. So I was like, oh man, this is going to be pretty hard if I want to make a living at music, because I'm actually coming out of pocket every time I'm doing, the thing that I love. So after a year of that, I was like, look, I'm ready to see some more of the world. I got some exposure to international people. 80% of the student body at Los Angeles Music Academy was from abroad, so I started to hear these stories about life in Italy or how it is over in Japan. And I was like, wow, I really want to get out and see some of the world. So I had an opportunity to travel to Europe with some of my really close friends, and we took off for a 2-month trip. And it was actually 2 or 3 days after September 11th that we left. And I remember just thinking at that time, like, holy cow, like the whole world is changing. And we almost didn't go, but thank God we did. And so we were on one of the first flights out, I think September 15th in 2001. And so then I got this whole different perspective on one, my home country, US, from seeing everything that happened subsequently from the eyes of people over in Europe and in another country. And that's when I really started to realize that the whole world is sort of, I look at the world as sort of like your playground and your potential addressable market. And so one of the things that we'll talk about here is looking at, the entire world as your potential customers and starting to sort of tailor your offer so that they can be purchased by people in, 180 plus countries instead of just a localized region, or what you're constrained by if you live in an area and have, say, a retail shop or something that's an in-person consultancy. So anyhow, after traveling for 2 months or so, having a blast in Europe, I met an American guy who had been playing music on the street for almost a year. And I had a traveler guitar with me. We were just like jamming in the park, and then we got a gig to go and play. And I remember thinking, we just got like 100 euros and free food and drink all night just to jam on some music. I was like, well, that's probably more than I made in the entire last year in LA. And maybe there's something to this. So the seed was planted. A couple days before we went home, we were in Nice, France, actually. And it was the day before we were going to get our train back to Paris and fly home. We came out of a club at like 2 in the morning, and like a group of 12 Arabic guys, I think, or whatever, cornered us in an alley and pretty much just beat the crap out of us. It was really bad. It was probably the worst fight I've ever been in. And we fortunately got away and got home, and somebody broke a wine bottle on my head, and I was all messed up and just blood. And then I remember laying in bed going to sleep that night. I was like, this isn't how it ends. This isn't how this freedom of 2 months of travel is going to, send me home with a headache and a huge scar. So when we woke up the next day, I said to my friends, I think I might stay. And they're like, yeah, whatever, man. We walked to the train station. Train pulls up, and they're like, okay, let's go. And then I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna make a go here. And they're like, yeah, whatever. Come on. They got on the train. I stood on the platform. They're like, come on, man. Come on. The train's about to go. And then it started moving, and they're like, oh shit, he's not on the train. And I was like, bye. The train pulled away, and then I was like, oh, wow. I'm here by myself. 19 years old, in Europe, with a guitar, bloody head. What am I gonna do now? So I went back to Vienna, Austria, where I'd met this other American guy, and we ended up getting a place together and playing out in bars and clubs and making more than enough. This was right when the currency changed over to euros, and so when we'd play and people would give tips, what used to be shillings was now 1 or 2 euro coins, and we were only paying like 170 a month to live in this student dorm, and I was like, oh my God, life's great. I'm playing guitar, I'm living abroad, I get to travel every couple weeks to see other countries, and just have a great time. So still wasn't interested in business. After a month or 2 of that, we met a guy, a local guy, that was going to the School of Audio Engineering. And he'd let us come over and moonlight. So from midnight to 6 a.m., we could go in, he'd work the soundboard, we could record. And I was like, this is the first time I'd seen the other side of the glass, the whole production side of music. And then I started to get interested in that. And I could tell probably hours of stories about that year living over in Europe, but the basic outcome was that I ended up deciding to move to Nashville, Tennessee, and go to School of Audio Engineering myself. So after a year of just total freedom, and many of my friends back home being like, dude, are you ever coming back? And at this point, I was pretty set on trying to make my own way, both in music and in life, and not go home and move in with my parents and get a job. It all sounded so unappealing. So we got to Nashville and enrolled in this 9-month audio engineering course. And a month or 2 in, I became friends with somebody else in the course named Jake Harsh. And we started to produce other artists, and ultimately we got a place on Music Row in Nashville, and we had a studio, and we were just doing music now 12, 13 hours a day, recording other people, producing tracks, writing our own stuff, playing out, and having the beginning formation of a band. And now, at this point, we were starting to write our own songs and start to get interest from other people in town. We had a rock band, not country, but then we saw there was sort of a fork in the road, right? On the one hand, we could go this sort of more traditional route, as much as you can have in the music industry, and sign with a record label, get a whole team of people, and turn over sort of creative control and sign a deal that's like 3 or 4 years, or 3 or 4 albums, maybe 4 to 7 years of commitment. I was like, well, that almost sounds like work. And this is sort of a recurring theme that I'm still struggle with in a way where I just don't really like to work, right? I want to do the things that I love and have them support my lifestyle to the greatest extent possible. So, but I'm also willing to work if it's on my own authority. So then we saw the other path was, we could incorporate our own record label and take on the responsibility for our own career. And ultimately, we decided, without having much business experience, that that was the direction that we were going to go. So fortunately, my father's also an entrepreneur, and I grew up around business people, so I was sort of familiar with the terms and built a sort of informal network of advisors. And this was the first time I had mentors that were, twice my age, giving me advice on how to take this, passion for music and really leverage it into a business. And so we incorporated, at the age of 21, a record label called Tabula Rasa, which means blank slate in Latin. And there we were. I my agreement with my partner, Jake, was that I'd handle all of the business side of things. He was super creative, he had a great sense of style. He was the lead singer. I was the lead guitarist, and we wrote all of our own music. And I set about raising money. So with this network of advisors, we put together a business plan, and I started hitting the phones. And in the first 6 or 7 months, we raised about $125,000. Not all at once, but it came in enough at a time where we could support getting studio time, getting a producer, and ultimately building a team, which we had at one point 8 or 10 people working for us, and we were like 21, 22 at this time. And I always had this experience of being sort of the youngest guy in the room and sort of feeling like I had to work extra hard for people to take me seriously. So I relied on my intellect and sort of my charisma. And so let's fast forward through that. We ultimately recorded our own album and found a partner with Sony's independent distribution, which is called Red, and ultimately released our album nationwide in 2005 and toured around the country in a van, just promoted super hard, and at the peak of that experience had our music on over 300 radio stations around the country. We had 9 of the 11 songs on our album were featured on MTV, whether it was The Real World, Road Rules, Simple Life. And we found that there were certain points of leverage that would let you bypass an insane amount of work or rejection. And so we partnered with the production company that did all of these shows, like The Real World and stuff that you see on MTV. So we signed one licensing deal with them, turned over our album, and then they put it on a shelf. And I actually visited there and saw this shelf at one time. It was about 100 CDs. And there was a person that sat there doing all the music for the shows on MTV, and they just, pull out a CD, and they had licensing rights to all these. And the way that that works is when you get your music synced to a broadcast, there's 2 agencies that track that, collect the royalties, and pay out the artist. So you had this thing called the 200% pie, the publishing part and the songwriting part. So since we had formed our own label, we owned all the rights to our music, and actually made a pretty decent amount of money in the tens of thousands of dollars, which was pretty good at age 22, 23, with our music on MTV, and this was very empowering. So I would say that my first foray into business was a pretty positive experience, if not extremely stressful at times. So there came a point after touring for months and months, over a year on end, where we never hit the big time, so to speak. We weren't #1 on Billboard, but we had promoted ourselves to the point where we actually hit #1 independent rock song in the US in August 2005, and sort of the peak experience from the whole time in the band was playing this showcase at the Viper Room in LA. And it was like this homecoming, right? The same clubs that I used to stand out front of and go and see bands, and they wouldn't even let us pay to play there. And now we got to roll up with our crew and see our name on the marquee, go in, rock the house, and then went to an after party at the Roosevelt, and I'm playing pool with Kid Rock, talking to Mark Cuban about getting our music video on his HD TV channel, tossing a lighter to Bruce Willis, and doing my best to flirt with girls, even though back then I didn't have very many skills in that department. That was sort of a thread that carried forward, because I realized that when we were in alignment with our passion, when we had played a show and then shortly after, we were getting attraction from girls. And I started to piece together, if I wanted to get relationships, I had to be doing the things that I really loved and hope that there was enough girls around to observe that, so that I didn't have to go through the awkwardness of, approaching and all of that. But shortly thereafter, something clicked in my mind, and I was like, I think we got the experience from this. And we just didn't really want to carry it forward and raise more money and do a second album, even though we were starting to move in that direction. So in a period of 1 week, my bandmate and I decided to fold our label, dissolve the band, and sort of go our own ways and experience other things in life. And this is really the first time when I realized that I had a chance to define a completely new identity. And after we go through this, I'm going to give you an exercise that some of you may have seen in the book. So I call it the Discover Your Identity exercise. And as I was driving home across the country from Nashville back to San Francisco, I was thinking, well, what's my next move, right? I've got all these contacts in the music industry. I'd actually started to really like business, being exposed to marketing, distribution, management, radio promotion, video production, all these different things that were auxiliary to just being a musician. So before I even arrived back in San Francisco on a 3-day drive, I decided I'm going to start a consulting firm. Then I started Krieger Consulting Group, and I even sketched out the logos and stuff. So touched back down in San Francisco, phoned up a bunch of people that I was working with when I was running our label, said, hey, I'm sort of a free agent now. Do you have any projects? And I immediately got some work from that. And that expanded out into doing business development and strategy and business planning for a number of other people. And over that next year, I ended up working with, some of you may know, Bill Romanowski, who is like 4-time Super Bowl champion. Actually had he was implicated for steroids and stuff, but the rap didn't stick. But I helped him launch a nutritional supplement company that's still running to this day. And that was a really cool experience because I started to feel empowered in a totally different role from being in the music industry. And I had another, some other great clients as well. But it got to a point where consulting with people on business development, at some point, everybody's common thread was, hey, we need to raise more money to really grow, right? All your ideas, the strategy and stuff's great, but we need money. So this was 2006, late 2006, and I started to look around and develop relationships in finance. I said, well, okay, I've got these clients, they've got budgets, and where can I find people that are investors and have a team of people that can raise money and facilitate business growth? And ultimately, I found a boutique investment bank in Orange County that had offices in New York and LA and I think San Diego. And I first I invested in one of their deals to get on the radar. And it ended up not really going anywhere, but that gave me the chance to sit down with the CEO over dinner. He wanted to pitch me on more deals to invest in. My agenda was to pitch him on basically giving me a title at the investment bank without actually working for them technically, but being able to piece together deals. I'd bring my book of clients, and they had a floor full of brokers that were working the phones. And I said, look, if I can bring the businesses together and also raise money, can I have a vice president of business development title? And ultimately, he said yes. And so I had this experience of always being sort of on the periphery, right? The traditional route is you become an analyst and then an associate and then maybe a principal, and you're working insane hours like you heard some of the other guys talk about. And I just sort of skirted past all that and got a business card that said vice president. And then I could go out and leverage that to talk to new, bigger clients than the ones I was originally working with, and just sort of stair-stepped up to putting together, multi-million-dollar deals at age 25, 26. Now, this was really empowering. But this was also in 2007 now. And anybody here that's old enough to remember 2007, it was just a different time. Every day the headlines was Dow hits new high, money everywhere, stocks exploding. It was a flush time, and I felt it. I was performing well. The company gave me a BMW 650, and I was driving around, this still sort of a punk kid, right? But I could back it up with the experience and the clients I put together, and sort of the peak experience of that. And this was a theme of like going through different businesses and different ideas to try and hit sort of a couple bullet points of accomplishments I was really happy with. So I ended up taking a company public, working directly with the CEO through what's called a reverse merger. And right about that time is when I discovered the game and what is now called Love Systems. And so I had this combination of like hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank and stock positions and cash, 26 or so years old. But I was working so much and my identity became so intertwined with what I did that when somebody would be like, hey, how you doing, Jesse? I'd be like, well, I got these 2 clients that are about to close later this week, and I'm almost finished doing a raise for this one client. Like, yeah, but how are you doing? That's how your business is doing. And I didn't acknowledge that there was a separation. And so then I realized that I wanted to change that. And so that's when I heard about a little program called Project Rockstar, which then was billed as a one-time only full life transformational program that is never going to be repeated again, but of course is now in its 6th year and going strong. But I was like, I'm going to do anything and everything it takes to get on this. So did my application, sent it in to Jim, and I booked an entire 3.5-month trip to Europe on the hope that I'd be accepted, and so that I'd already be over there. And so I flew over to Europe, didn't tell anybody at the investment bank I was leaving, just figured I'd pay a higher phone bill and always answer the phone whenever it rang, set up an international plan. And so even though I ran up like a $1,000 phone bill that first month before I got accepted, I'd be sitting on the steps in Rome talking to clients. I'd be in France on my computer putting together private placement memorandums and sending them back. And I made it a full 3 weeks before anybody realized I wasn't in the country. And so then I realized, wow, in this sort of a personalized business, I can still kind of run it from anywhere in the world. So that became another theme that was introduced. Being able to act on my own authority and being able to do it from anywhere in the world with a laptop and internet and a phone. But then the call came through saying, hey, we're interested, let's do this final interview for Project Rockstar, and are you available on this date? And I was like, oh, that's so funny, I'll be in London right on that time. Why don't we just get together and do it in person? I was like, oh, that sounds great. Hung up the phone, walked to a computer, and booked a ticket to London. So arrived, and sort of the rest is history. Got accepted to the program, and that was the real sort of turning point, where then I said, hey, to the CEO, I got to be honest with you, I've been over in Europe for the last month. He's like, what? And I was like, I'm not really going to be working too much for the next few months, but I'll be back around, later on this year. He was cool with it. He was pretty chill. So then it just jumped in full steam to Project Rockstar, sort of, right where you guys are now. And over the course of that program, I may have told a couple of you this story before, but Jim and I met a very successful entrepreneur who had just sold his company to AOL and just finished the 6-month cash out period. So he had I think it was close to $100 million or so. And he was all about trying to learn, this dating stuff. And we just hung out every day for 2 weeks. And then he took us out to dinner one night. He's like, look, he had lived in Shanghai for a couple years. He had started a business there prior to the one he sold. He's like, let me show you guys what it's like over in that part of the world. And within a couple of days, he offered to fly us to Shanghai, first class everything, all expenses paid. And before you knew it, we were sitting in the Virgin Atlantic terminal and on our way, sort of left the program entirely to go to Shanghai. And that was just an eye-opener. This was in the middle of the 2008 Olympics, which of course was in Beijing, but the entire city of Shanghai was just bustling with life. And I'd never imagined going to China, and I was looking around saying, wow, this is going to be a big part of the future. There's so much activity here. Everywhere you look, there's cranes and buildings going up, and it just looked like the wild, wild East. And that planted the seed of, wow, I wonder what I could do that would involve China from a business standpoint, but also to further explore this from a position of things that I'm interested in and passionate about. So we ended up coming back and wrapped up. Want to say a few words? Yeah. Andy Venture, everybody. And finished up the program, flew home, and just felt like $1 million, but also was like, look, I don't want to lose steam after this. So 2 things happened. Before I flew home, I had volunteered to be on 5 or 6 upcoming boot camps. So I was like, I'm going to set accountability systems for myself so that I won't go home and backslide into the position I was, already having dates on the calendar, knowing I wouldn't want to let down the people that had helped me so much. And the other was saying, I'm going to explore this whole China opportunity. So the same guy that flew us over there made a couple introductions and ultimately gave me the introduction to somebody that was doing a custom USB flash drive business. So he had 3 or 4 factories in South China, in Shenzhen. He had a website facing towards the UK market. And the target audience was sort of people that go to conferences and marketing directors and schools and universities and anybody that would use 100 to 10,000 flash drives for marketing purposes. And I was like, I think I'll make a go at that. So with that relationship in place, and he also gave me, I think it was like $35,000, $40,000 of startup capital. I was like, great, I've got my new direction in life. So over the course of that summer, I went from being sort of a hard-driving investment banker who was all about his business to having this life-changing experience called Project Rockstar, getting introduced to China and having a sort of a turnkey business opportunity with the financing and relationships in place. So then I began to study Chinese, and I caught a bad case of yellow fever, and just my entire MO shifted towards Asia. So I built the front end of the business, which is called USB Superstore, in about 2 months, using a lot of the techniques I'm going to show you here, leveraging online talent platforms like Elance, Guru.com, Freelancer, where you can hire designers, developers, customer service, admin. And I'd also just read the 4-Hour Work Week, and I was like, look, I want to try this sort of virtual business structure, dealing with physical products, but doing it in a way where we were in one place and sort of the business existed virtually around us online. So I made a couple trips back and forth to China, met the suppliers, and had a lot of fun memories out of there, and coincided those trips with doing boot camps so that all the expenses were paid and I was developing my career. So this is when I was really going in the direction of what I would call lifestyle entrepreneurship, and having the things that I was interested in excelling at and becoming better and better at, and that I was passionate about, funding the lifestyle and building out the network that supports a good, viable business. So I launched this with 2 partners in 2008, and 2 weeks later, the entire economy fell off a cliff. And this was actually a really scary time. It was one of the times when I really had sort of a gut check, and I won't go into this other piece too much, but at the time my father and his partner were running a series of hedge funds, and they had brought in all of their clients and all of their friends. So our entire friends and family network of about 100 people were invested in these funds, and they were doing 8% a year every year for the last 20 plus years, and it looked like the safest thing in the world. Anybody take a guess at where all of those funds were custodied? Madoff Securities, the single biggest fraud in history. And so I just launched a business. I had gotten some startup capital that was borrowed. I sort of went all in with this and launched, and then the entire world just sort of crumbled. Everybody we knew, their net worth dropped by 50 to 90%. The hundreds of thousands of dollars of stock positions that I had built up doing investment banking essentially became almost worthless. They went down like 85, 90%. And so it was sort of a reality check. And I was like, okay, there's not really a safety net anymore. So I threw myself into the business, and we built it, doubled almost every month, from 5 to 10,000 to 17,000 to 30,000 to 45,000. And then in the 5th year, one of my partners had landed a really big contract, and we made over $120,000 in the 6th month we were in business. And finally we were like, we caught a break. We could do a distribution to ourselves, have some money, and not just be living off of savings. We built that up in the first year to just under $500,000 in sales. This was empowering because it sort of proved that I could go into a new space, a new industry where I had no previous experience, and apply all of the skills of business development and consulting and all the pieces that are required for entrepreneurship, and actually build a good, viable business around that. Well, from there, a number of other things happened, and on the side, I started another business that did renewable energy credits, and I've always been somebody that maybe doesn't go 100% in one direction, but has 2 or 3 projects going simultaneously. And ultimately, I realized that having never wanted to go to school before, I finally thought that I might value getting a university education. So I had been doing community college classes at night on the side. It took almost no time, and I was getting great grades. And I had an opportunity to transfer to UC Berkeley. So I took it, arrogantly thinking I could run a 10-person company and do 20 units of hardcore math and economics. And then again had a crisis moment where I was like, there's not enough time in the day. So I found a buyer for the business and ultimately was able to sell it, and it still runs to this day, and threw myself into completing 2 years of Chinese study and political economy at one of the top schools. And at that time, I really got a value out of going to school later in life. And I don't need to talk too much about that, but I don't regret that decision for a second. It sort of took me out of the business sphere for the first time in my life and allowed me to just focus on learning things for the sake of learning. Well, after selling the business, there was sort of some contention between my partners and I. They didn't want to sell, and we had this sort of a big fight. But when it all worked out and the dust settled, I was like, I've got so much knowledge and experience here. I want to get it down on paper. So while I was in school, I was writing an ebook on how to do business with China. I ultimately released that, and it's actually still out there on outsourcetochina.com. And on probably the 4th or 5th time going over to Asia to do boot camps, one of the people that was helping out had published a book on Facebook marketing. And I was like, hey man, you know, who's your publisher? And you know, I've got this book idea, got this book, can you make an introduction? Well, he made an introduction to the publisher, who ultimately said, look, we like your idea, but we're not going to do a book on China to US business, but you have some cool stories and experiences. Why don't you change it around and have it be about your whole life as an entrepreneur? Hence, Lifestyle Entrepreneur was born. Last year on Project Rockstar, I had turned in the manuscript to my publisher in Asia, and I left after the first leg to fly over and do the release, and came back for Sweden for the last leg after having done book tours and talks. And within 2 months, it became the #2 business bestseller in Malaysia and is also out in Singapore. Long story short, I've taken each experience and parlayed it into the next thing that I want to do. And I took all of that credibility from releasing a book and doing tours around Asia to get a US publishing deal. So as we stand here today, the day before coming to Rockstar, I turned in my revised manuscript to my US publisher, and it'll be out later this year. So it's sort of like history repeating itself, but in a sense, it's nice because it's bringing it back home. Whereas I had done all these things in far-flung parts of the world, and now I really feel ready to try and take the concepts in Lifestyle Entrepreneur, this whole approach of taking the things you're interested in and passionate about and turning them into businesses that support a lifestyle, and doing it here in my home country. And on top of the book, I started coaching and working with other people and consulting, and thus Lifestyle Entrepreneurs Academy was born. So that sort of brings us up to the present, probably 20 minutes for 10 years of business history, but I hope that gives you a little more of an idea of some of my background and really how I've always felt sort of on the margins of traditional work and society in many ways by being involved in love systems and having businesses in other places and sometimes in other languages. And all that is to say that now I'm so passionate about sharing this concept and these frameworks and helping the next generation of lifestyle entrepreneurs not follow in my footsteps, but define their own paths, defining your own paths, and being able to carve out your place in the world in a way in which you feel both fulfilled, alive, energized, and fully expressed in your identity and doing the things that you're passionate about. So that's a little bit about my history. And if anybody has a question, you can throw it out. Otherwise, I want to jump into this Discover Your Identity framework and start generating some ideas for each of you that will then put through this process of Lifestyle Entrepreneurs Academy. So I'm just going to grab a sip of water.
I've got one question. So with some of the ventures that you've done, it sounds like you've had like some pre-existing, I guess, relationships or contacts that have helped with that. So as far as like starting up from scratch, what was your experience, I guess, with that aspect, as opposed to, you know, you mentioned like with finance, you had some contacts, and that helped a little bit. And when you got the VP business card, that obviously helped a little bit more. Does that make sense?
So is the question, how do you start a business in a new field with or without a lot of experience or relationships?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, if anybody's seen the commencement speech that Steve Jobs gave at Stanford many years back, he said something in there that really struck me. And he said, looking back through your experiences, you can only connect the dots looking backwards. Going through all those experiences at the time, I didn't know what I was going to do next. And when I was starting businesses in different areas, people were like, but you don't know anything about renewable energy. What do you know about manufacturing flash drives? What do you know about writing a book? I have a sort of a thick skin, and I was like, well, I don't, but I'm going to learn. And in each case, there was a few key relationships that wasn't necessarily intentional, but I saw the potential of the opportunity and just chose to focus my intention and attention on partnering with other people, setting up a way where I could learn from them and grow, which is sort of what led me to become a love systems instructor and led me to learn Chinese and start that business. So it really is about relationships as much as it is about passions and just going after the things you want. And I think they work hand in hand. They sort of intertwine. I don't think you need very many. Really, just one or two or a small handful is enough to get the sort of the blueprint and the template that you need to go in a different direction, career-wise or interest-wise. And then it's just about having the tenacity to see it through. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Did you ever think about quitting?
Oh, yeah. I've sort of, sometimes I have to remind myself that I can tell my story and give it a big splash, but there's so many times when things aren't going well or when a problem arises. Yeah. You have intense feelings of self-doubt and questioning. And I never really cared what other people thought about what I was doing with my life or what their opinion was. But if I felt like I was doing the thing that I really should be and it wasn't going right or things weren't falling into place, yeah, man, there's plenty of times I've laid awake at night just wondering. But then when something happens that reaffirms that you are going in the right direction, then it's pretty easy, at least for me, to say, oh, what was I thinking? It was just late at night and I was scared. So it's sort of a volatile, emotional experience, entrepreneurship is. But I just say, is the reward bigger than the sacrifice you make? Is it worth putting in the time and the effort to learn the things you need to know to do what you want to do so you can be the person that you want to be? And my answer has always been yes to that.